awesome. Like when you go to a specific area, you get to try like that area's type of beer and the types of beers they brew, and especially with wild ales, which are essentially using wild yeast that's fermented through yeast in the air. You get to taste
Similar like a wine.
their microflora, right? Like with wine, everyone talks about terroir, and like the differences in terroir and the grapes is what really affects the flavor in the wine. Whereas with beer, it's more along the lines of the microflora or the wild yeast that's in the air is what is really the biggest driver of what's affecting the flavors in those beers. And Budweiser, you lose that altogether because their whole thing is boiled down to make sure that if you have a Budweiser in California, it's going to taste the same in New York, it's going to taste the same in Japan, it's going to taste the same in England, which is like conceptually cool. And like there's a challenge, and that's they've been able to overcome that challenge, which I can imagine was extremely difficult. But ultimately, I feel like that's not what craft beer is about.
And yeah, so I think the perfect example of a good craft beer that we have a keg that we're putting on pretty soon. Fox Farm is this new brewery in Salem, Connecticut, and they have this beer called Anata, where the brewer's wife owns a vineyard where they have their own grapes, and they use, I believe it's 500 pounds of red wine grapes for this beer.
No, it was actually it was a little more. It was like 900. It worked out to just under 2 pounds per gallon or something like that.
So a lot of grapes. They use a lot of grapes that are all local to the vineyard down the road that the family also owns. And their vineyard has they had how many tons this year? Not that many.
So they had a short yield this year and they got 2,500 pounds. They said they usually are looking at somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 pounds.
But so for like something like Budweiser, there's no way they'd be able to recreate a beer similar because they have to have this beer and put it all over the country, if not the world. Whereas with craft beer, you get to see these really cool things where a lot of small producers of beer are able to just be like, you know what? I know a lot of great grapes, and I want to use this and get some wine character out of my beer by bringing in these red wine grapes. And they made a beautiful, beautiful beer that's not necessarily for every palate, but is a fantastic beer for a lot of our more adventurous beer drinkers.
Okay. So good. We're warmed up.
Yeah.
We're warmed up a little bit, yeah. Yeah.
All right. Okay. He is ready. So, let me see. I know what I need.
Didn't realize this was going to be Facebook Live. I might have actually tried to do my hair.
Does that mean we're on camera?
Trust me. Yeah, you're on camera. You set it up. See it?
Yep, I do now.
Pass me that. That sheet.
Okay.
Excuse me. All right. How's it look? I gotta ask him. How's it look?
I can't see. I should have done my hair.
How's my hair? How's my hair?
Not
Your
really
hair's
existent.
fine.
It looks good.
It's good, right?
It looks good.
Good. I did it this morning. I shaved it. I didn't.
It looks good.
Okay. Looks good. I should have brushed my hair. Been rolling around.
Well, shoot, if I would have known this was Facebook Live, I would have gotten that haircut I keep on saying I'm going to get and never get.
Well, look at it from the standpoint, now you know.
Now I know.
Right? Whenever you're invited somewhere, I better go ahead and take myself up on that offer. Right?
I was like, oh, this is just gonna be radio. I'm gonna look messy, but whatever. It's radio.
It's radio.
Next time I'm gonna come in like a suit and look all professional.
It's okay. All right, I think we're ready.
Look with a beard out, so I look like the bearded. We gotta have one guy with a beard.
Yeah, that's not gonna be me.
It's Tarian, not me. That is so not me.
I mean, it just can't be. Like, it wouldn't ever grow in.
There are issues.
Be messy.
Our chef and myself, we have difficulty growing
beards.
Yeah, like long, solid facial hair. And like everyone in the beer industry generally has some sort of beard.
Has some kind of facial hair.
It's an impairment. It's okay.
Beards.
Yeah, I don't even like beards at all. Like I would shave it off and keep a clean shaven face regardless. But the fact that I can is just something where they can say that I can. And I'm like, well, you're right.
shot. Okay. Am I in the shot now?
I see you, yeah.
Okay.
I figure out where all the cameras are. I see the one looking at me. There seems to be a better... That is it. That is it. Okay.
The blue one's got me.
Yeah.
All right. I'm trying to move over.
I can't without laughing. It's,
And turn your phones down.
Here it is.
All right. We're here. And this is another episode of the show on a Wednesday. WNHH, NewHavenIndependent.org, 103.5 FMLP. My name is Michelle Turner, and in the studio with me are the gentlemen who have hit on something very special for New Haven, Connecticut. And they are the owners of the Beer Collective. So introduce yourselves, gentlemen.
So my name is Torn Davis. I'm originally from Colorado, but I've made New Haven my home for about 2 years now, just over, and I've loved it so far. It reminds me a lot, actually, of home. Weather, a lot of stuff that's organic and local.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm Craig Sklar, the other owner. I grew up in Guilford, Connecticut, not far from here, so been in Connecticut most of my life. And yeah, now we're settled down in New Haven and put together the Beer Collective for everyone to come down and hang out at.
So what made this come together? What was it that made you all say, you know, this will be a good idea? Were you sitting around drinking beer with people?
That is exactly it, really. Like, I mean, I think drinking beers was at the heart of us forming the Beer Collective. And we used to do these things called bottle shares, which are similar to wine tastings, where people will bring a bunch of different wines, drink a bunch of different styles, spit it into some sort of bucket, and then just taste more wines. Except with beer shares, you don't really spit out the beer.
No, you drink it,
and we drink it. Yeah,
we definitely drink it.
We definitely drink it, and that's how we met. That's originally where some ideas were. We were like, can we somehow recreate this similar type of vibe on a bigger scale, on something where we can make other people enjoy what we enjoy about craft beer?
Yeah. I mean,
Get close, Craig.
We started drinking in the city. I had been working for a beer distributor for a while and was trying to figure out a way to kind of leave that and start something where I didn't have to answer to a boss. And, me and Torn are both very passionate beer people. We've drank a ton of beer together at that point. And it was cool because, I was from out here, Torn was from Colorado, so we got to try a ton of stuff from Colorado, and I got to introduce him to a ton of beer from out here. So there's, a lot of drinking involved. And in one of those drinking sessions, we were like, hey, we should open a bar. And we did.
Yeah, it wasn't like we were just sitting there the whole time slightly inebriated, like, hey, we should start a bar. There was definitely more thought, but at its heart, beer was definitely there.
At first, we might have been inebriated, but it's fine.
Yeah, maybe the first time, but we were thinking about locations, and Craig, being from this area, suggested New Haven. And I remember the first time I came out here, we went around, I just fell in love with it immediately. It was a really nice community. We thought we'd be able to add something that it didn't have so far, and we basically just went with it.
Yeah. So, in choosing location, because technically the location that you chose is sort of off the beaten path, right? It's not necessarily a place where you can just walk down the street and say, oh, I ran upon this beer place. It's very kind of out of the way. So what made you decide that this was the place? Or was it cost? Was it an issue of, well, this piece of property is not necessarily something that's going for the other prices in downtown?
I think there was a lot of aspects that went into the final decision-making process for where the location was going to be. I think from the get-go, we fell in love with New Haven, so it was about finding something in New Haven that worked for us. And yeah, cost is always going to be a factor for sure. Trying to be somewhere like right in Temple Street or right on College Street in the middle of downtown, the price is, probably twofold. So we looked for something that worked for us. And honestly, one of the big things that I immediately fell in love with the space we chose on Court Street was the backyard, the patio.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. Like when I first walked in there and saw the patio, that was the big thing that.
Yeah, we started off drinking in the city a lot in bottle shares, but a lot of what we also did was going to patios in Brooklyn and backyards in Brooklyn and drinking, and there's so many of those. And once we walked into our backyard and, there's the fire escape stairs kind of dropping down into it, it felt like a Brooklyn backyard to me. And
how much square footage? What's the square feet of that particular place?
We're just under 2,000 inside, and then we have about a 600 square foot patio. And so, yeah, roughly 2,500 square feet. Plus, we do have a downstairs with some of the most unique bathrooms, I'd say, in New Haven.
I've never been downstairs.
So, yeah,
I have to try the downstairs. We've always gone upstairs.
On the men's side especially, we have toilets that we believe are like 100 years old.
Really?
If you look at the age at which they built toilets like that, it was over 100 years ago.
Wow.
And they're very old. Are they made out of ceramic? What would they be technically made out of?
They're very large ceramic toilets that are
very large,
5 feet tall.
Yeah.
They're interesting, and there were pieces that we felt like we couldn't get rid of. So.
Yeah.
So you held on to it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, I remember this building as having a life of a Miami vibe club called the Blue Pearl.
Yes,
right?
We've heard a lot
and
about
the floor was painted white.
Wow,
and they had very sheer curtains hanging up to sort of divide where your bar is now. That was the seating area. And where the seating area is, that was the bar.
Yeah.
So I distinctly remember that.
Yeah,
So
I think you can still see on the floor almost like a stain of where the old bar was if you look really closely.
if you look close enough, right?
And if you knew it well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
So and so how long did it take you to kind of say, okay, we're going to kind of set this up differently? And how long did that take? Because the building had been shuttered, right?
I mean, so yeah, immediately we knew we wanted to set it up differently to our liking. When we wanted to do a craft beer bar our way, and with what we had enjoyed in the bars we visited a lot in New York, we knew we wanted a lot of repurposed wood. If we could have an exposed brick, that'd be great. If not, no worries. But we wanted it to have that kind of old home feel where there's a lot of natural wood, a lot of natural color, a lot of stuff like that. Warmth. Yes, that's a good word for it. And so we knew immediately we wanted to change around the room a lot. And I mean, I'll let Craig talk a little bit about how much time it took and whatnot, but it took us a good amount of time, and we changed. In the actual bar space on the main floor, I don't think there's anything that we didn't change. Everything we completely
is basically
remodeled.
The same as far as the flooring and
the flooring. Well, so we sanded, we stained, we did.
Look at Craig's face. He's like, no,
it was horrible.
Nothing's the same.
Nothing is the
Nothing
same. Nothing at all is the same. Basically, it was a lot of work, but I think we made something that we liked, and people who come in, they seem to like it as well.
Yeah,
we definitely ripped that place to pieces. But there was Michael's and something Sons, I think.
Michael's Downtown.
Michael's Downtown, an Italian restaurant that was in there right after Blue Pearl. I mean, otherwise, I don't know. The Miami Beach Vibe Lounge could have worked.
and for the most part, I thought it did because people were always there when I went there. It was pretty crowded.
Very interesting look. Definitely.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it would have vibed with the craft beer culture, to be honest. But
people,
it would have been
who
interesting.
told us about the location, they always knew Blue Pearl. They weren't as familiar with Michael's Downtown. I don't think it got to be there long enough. There was a flood that hit the building. I think on the third floor, a water heater burst, and it was on a day where Michael's was closed, so it was flooded for 24 hours before anyone even noticed.
Ooh.
Bunch of damage, and so yeah, they were put out a little early.
Yeah.
But everyone's talked interestingly about the Blue Pearl. I wouldn't necessarily not everyone's necessarily. I wouldn't say negative. I was like, oh yeah, that place was weird, interesting. Like I heard they did fondue. It sounds interesting. I would have.
It
really
was
wanted
an
to
interesting
go in
place.
its heyday,
It was an interesting place in its heyday because they were trying to promote this like very chilled out, very place where you could be an adult and kind of relax and not really have the same kind of vibe as you would in your so-called typical club.
Yeah.
That was the whole idea. At least I thought so. Yeah. And I was very surprised when it closed because, again, every time that I went, it's pretty packed. Yeah. So you just never know.
One of the more interesting stories I heard about the Blue Pearl was about the closing. And I cannot confirm or deny if this is true, but I was told on the last day they were open that the owner was there handing out wrenches and hammers and telling people to smash the crap out of that place before they left. So I've heard that they destroyed it on their way out, but I don't know if that's true or not. If it was true, I'm like, man, I wish I was there. That would be a really fun way to close down a bar.
Well, it was a way to introduce you guys coming in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
Cleared everything out for us. It was nice.
The end of the old, start of a new, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, talk a little bit about the choice of beer. And I want us to go back into the conversation about Budweiser that we had, and as opposed to the IPAs and all of that. So talk about the choice of beer that you have and why you're doing that, because everything is local.
Yeah. So just about everything is local. We try to have as much local as possible, but sometimes we'll fill in other styles, or there's various classics from either Europe or even made across the country that we'll also bring in from time to time. But I'd say the number one word I'd use to describe our list and how we look at beer is curated. In the sense, we try to always have...
Now, what does that mean?
When I say that, we have a list where we only try to have 16 lines because we like a lot of rotation in the lines.
Okay.
If beer's sitting on taps for too long, it eventually goes stale. It won't necessarily hold as long, and we want to be able to have a lot of variety in our choices. So there's a lot of breweries in the country now. There's almost 6,000,
wow.
Maybe even more than 6,000.
Small breweries?
Small breweries, microbreweries.
Wow.
So there's a lot of choices, and we try to have a very select group that includes a lot of local, and then just basically high-quality beers that from producers we know who respect the liquid, and all craft. So we only serve beer that is at least majority craft owned, and most is going to be very local. Within IPAs, which are the more popular style right now, we go basically extremely hyper local. I'd say outside of the New England area, so if you included, like, let's say upstate New York, maybe New York proper, up to Vermont, almost every IPA that we serve will be from those areas, with the rare exception. I can think of a few exceptions, but for the most part,
how long does an IPA hold up? When you start to talk about things going stale and being on tap too long,
most brewers try to give, is it 120 days roughly?
I mean, yeah. I mean, most breweries that are distributing nationwide will give their IPAs somewhere between 90 and 150 days. Usually somewhere around 120. I know Stone, which is one of the big guys that sends a lot of IPAs around, as well as like Lagunitas. Lagunitas might actually do 6 months. Some guys will go as much as 6 months, but really, 120 days is kind of standard for craft breweries. And the way, IPAs are being brewed these days, especially the New England style, where they're very hazy.
The most popular style going.
Yeah,
really?
The most popular styles.
What makes it so popular? If that's the sidebar here, what makes it popular?
It's the accessibility to them, right? So many people look at IPAs and they think bitter, grassy, West Coast, very piney, bitter IPAs, which is very different than what New England IPAs are. They're very fruit forward. They use, wheat or flaked oats to basically hold the hops in suspension, so that you get these very intense, like pineapple, papaya, melon, citrus.
So you really get the
really
citrus flavors.
Change the whole flavor profiles on IPAs, so that you're not getting these bitter kind of grassy beers that some people don't really appreciate. You remember the old Keystone Light commercials, bitter beer phase.
Yeah.
People don't like that.
I love those commercials.
New England IPAs taste like juice half the time, so people drink them like it's juice.
The ones that are most desired taste exactly like that, like juice. And a lot of the people who go into bars and they're like, oh, I don't like hoppy beer, I could give them a New England IPA and they would absolutely love it. They'd be like, oh wow, yeah, this is really good, I'll take another one of those non-hoppy beers. And they're drinking an IPA. And so they're a really good introductory beer, but at the same time, a lot of the beer aficionados really like the flavors that provides too. So it's interesting. Like, there's a lot of people who are kind of fighting the movement towards a style, and I think there's definitely room for both. There's room for the hoppier, bitter beers that are traditionally thought of as like clear filtered IPAs, and there's room for some of these newer ones that don't have the shelf life of the old ones, which can be problematic and why we try to rotate a lot. But like, there's room for both, and there's room for a lot in beer, I'd say.
And I think it's funny too, because a lot of people that come in and they ask for like not hoppy beers, and we try them on these New England IPAs, but New England IPAs probably have 4 or 5 or 6 times as much hops as the traditional IPA. But it's just when you have that much of it, you actually get a much more realistic flavor profile of the hop, which is why you're getting so much more of these fruit flavors, because hops are typically a very fruity and oily plant that gives a lot of those flavors off.
I was getting ready to say, and it probably holds that flavor, right?
Well, the problem with hops is the oil residue will start to dissolve after 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. So that's why, especially with these New England IPAs, I mean, the shelf lives on them are shorter, right? That sweet spot for these guys is going to be between 2 and 4 weweeks. So that gives you a 2-week window to try to sell these beers.
Okay.
And now people will pour them past that, and we'll pour them up to 2 months probably, but after 5 or 6 weeks, you're going to start to significantly see changes in the way the beer tastes.
And depending on the brewer, I've had some great breweries where I've had their beer a month and a half, 2 after it was brewed, and it just didn't taste the same. It was clearly meant to be drank earlier, which is going to be different than a lot of the other styles where certain beers are meant to last somewhere around a month. Some of the New England IPAs that have a lot of protein still within the beer. Okay. Other beers like regular IPAs maybe up to that 6 months, like certain breweries. And then there's going to be other beers that we also offer that are good for years, that are better aged. So there's certain beers, generally, if they're going to be higher in alcohol, or if they're like wildly fermented, which is a totally different animal, then over time, similar to wine, they grow, they oxidize, and will have different flavors that are more desirable. Or they'll just grow and they'll have live active yeast that will be fermenting the actual bottle or device holding the beer, and it'll taste different, maybe a little bit softer, maybe not as acidic over time. And those are all flavors that people really like.
So it's important to try to get that beer to you all as soon as possible, right?
Generally, yeah.
Generally, yes.
Because if not, it can't sit and wait.
Exactly. Especially for the for the IPAs that people love. Those ones we want hops,
as soon
as possible.
As soon as.
The less hoppy a beer or the higher in alcohol, the more we might be able to do some stuff. Like some of the cooler events I've been to will actually do beers where they'll be like, oh, we're offering a 2015 Dogfish Head 120-minute beer, which is going to be a beer that is 18% ABV. And over,
what does that mean?
Alcohol per volume. So it's alcohol, like to put it in perspective, a lager is generally going to be around 4.5 to 5% ABV. So it's 3.5 to 4 times stronger than the typical beer that people are used to drinking. So literally a glass of it, when you first have it, it's barely drinkable to people who aren't used to it. It's like drinking 1.5 glasses of wine.
It's got some heat. It's got a little booze to it.
A little bit of booze, you can say.
Yeah.
So some of those beers, when you first have them, they're actually going to be too boozy. And when you try to drink them, it's just going to taste like you're drinking like fire.
Right.
But if you give them a few years, they oxidize a bit. You get a little bit more of that like caramelized, figgy flavor. And that can sometimes make a beer a lot better.
Yeah, as those flavors develop, sometimes they'll cover the booziness or the heat. So it kind of creates a more drinkable, more enjoyable experience. But yeah, I mean, timing with beers is definitely, I think, very important. From IPAs needing to be drink fresh to... some sours being, you could age some sours and some wildly fermented beers for years and years and years. And it's always a preference thing, right? You're seeing now a lot of what they're calling pastry stouts, where they're adding vanilla and cinnamon and all kinds of different adjuncts. And with those, I feel like you might want to drink them kind of on the fresher side.
Yeah.
But the standard rule of thinking for big bourbon barrel-aged stouts is you can age it for as long as you want, right? Because they're only going to get better. That booze is going to kind of dissipate a little bit, and you're going to have like a melding of the flavors, kind of. And you'll see flavors develop more so that cover up that booziness, so it becomes a much more richer, silkier, caramelized, complex beer.
So, when we were talking earlier, we were talking about the difference between Budweiser and an IPA, and you all had really interesting things to say about that.
Yeah, we can touch on those a little bit. Yeah. I think we had kind of started off talking about how Budweiser's big goal is to produce the exact same beer everywhere in the world. So if you go to Japan, if you go to London, if you go to New York, LA, I mean, wherever you go, you're going to get a Budweiser. It's going to taste like a Budweiser. And that is something that they strive for and a goal they have to. And something we had kind of touched on was what craft is kind of doing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and what we try to focus on at the bar and with the craft focus is a lot more localized, more of a hand-touched approach, similar to how food is going. Like if you look at, let's say, New Haven, Elm City Market, or at any of the Whole Foods, we're trying to go to a more organic, localized approach. And a lot of brewers are doing the same thing. And I think the brewers we were talking about earlier, like specifically Kent Falls Brewing, which we try to generally have at the Beer Collective, and They're a brewery out of King, Connecticut, and they strive for as much local ingredients as possible. So, for instance, they have certain beers they're doing now where they have hops that grow at their own farm, the Camsrode Farm in Kent.
Wow.
They have...
That blows my mind.
Yeah.
It's a great place.
But so the other thing, too,
is
it's very interesting, and like they're very ambitious doing this because obviously hops don't grow as well here as they would in, say, the Pacific Northwest, where most of the best hops grow. So they have some of their own hops and other hops that they get locally, and they'll do beers where everything is local and everything is basically within a 100-mile radius of their brewery/farm. So they'll get as many local hops as possible, as many local grains as possible, as many local malts as possible, and they'll make a beer that tastes like New England. And there's just no way.
And explain what New England tastes like, because I think before
delicious.
We said, well, we definitely know. We know it's delicious.
Basically, when you're walking outside and you smell the air, you smell, especially over in an area like Litchfield County where there's a lot of farmland, you get some of that natural flavor. Kent Falls, I believe they procure a lot of their own yeasts that they get in the area. And when you drink their beer, it's like you taste it, and it tastes almost like you're there. Where like if you taste their beer and you've never been to Kent Falls, first time you'll go to Kent Falls and be like, I've smelled this before.
Yes.
I've had this before.
It's just like one of those things. You walk into it, you smell it, you taste it, you know where it's coming from just from that. Like the beer tastes like that area.
Right.
And there's just a lot of things you can do with a craft brewery that you couldn't do at a massive scale. Whereas Budweiser's goal is to make the exact same beer and make it throughout the world. A brewery like Kent Falls, their goal is to make something that they think they would enjoy, that they'd like to be drinking on a day-to-day basis. Try to make it local. Try to do something very, very unique. And oftentimes you just don't have enough ingredients. There's no way they'd be able to do one of their beers that's all locally grown ingredients on a massive scale. Or one of the other breweries we were talking about was Fox Farm and some of the stuff they're doing now.
Yeah, and they're doing, along those same lines, they love using local ingredients. And what's really cool about them is, Zach and Dave Adams, the two owners, Zach's wife actually lives, I'm not actually 100% sure how far away, but it's, within a quarter mile or so. They have a vineyard there that his wife's family has owned for a long time and is producing grapes, and they're using those grapes in their beer. So
it's just fascinating because you wouldn't think of pairing that, or even the beer being, the base of beer.
A lot of my mom doesn't even think, she will not drink beer at all, and I've tried to give her samples of different beers because I know if she just drinks certain drinks, she likes wine enough to where I could find some beer to fit her palate. She wouldn't drink it, but most people's perception of what beer is just isn't the full picture. There's a lot of breweries like Fox Farm that are doing beers where they have red wine grapes in the beer.
Wow.
And local red wine grapes at that. And you just can't do that if you're trying to make a beer that appeases every palate.
Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's they're not for everybody, I would say. They definitely are. They have like a wine beer kind of hybrid thing going on with some of the beers they produce, which is really interesting. And for guys that like sour beers, they're going to really love it. And for wine drinkers, they're going to find something that they've probably never had before that they probably find incredibly interesting, which is really cool to see. But yeah, I mean, it's something you'll never see in a scale like Budweiser, because Budweiser's goal, again, is consistency across, continents, which is, it's cool and impressive, but something craft beer does that is so different is using localized ingredients and using localized yeast strains and the microflora in the areas to create beers that are, more specific to area, similar to like, champagne is made in France.
Right.
Well, for beer, we have gouzes, which are, blended 3-year oak-aged beers that are only produced in Brussels and Belgium. And you also have so many other beers that are just localized to regions and region specific that, Budweiser doesn't really take into account. They just want consistency. And so much about craft beer is tasting the difference and seeing what's different and seeing what different regions are making that's different than, what New England's brewing, what California's brewing, what North Carolina and Boulder and Seattle. Like, there's so many different beer meccas, especially in this country now, that all producing different styles of beer, and there's no reason that, you can't go to 100 different places and try 100 different styles of beer.
Yeah.
You don't always want the same thing in every state.
Right.
And then the other thing that I think is really cool is us we were kind of the new guy on the block when we came in. And it was basically just Craig and I, who we hand built a lot of the bar. We obviously had people who helped, but we did a lot of work there.
Do either of you have a background in food and beverage, or you just said we're going to do this?
I mean, I have a background in beverage. I sold alcohol for a long time. I've worked in retail establishments in both Connecticut. I worked at Coastal Wine and Spirits. Little shout out in Bradford,
Hey, y'all.
Connecticut. Yeah, right. I worked there for a long time when I was in high school, and that's where I first started kind of getting into craft beer. And then I worked for Whole Foods in their little like tasting room bar thing where we had growlers for sale, and we had tons of craft beer. That's where I think I really fell in love with craft beer. And then, I have minimal experience doing some bartending and some catering stuff, and a ton of distribution experience working for a distributor. But, I mean, ultimately, we figured our passion for beer and our understanding, I mean, between me and Torn, we've been to, I don't even know how many different states, countries, breweries, where we've tried to put together the really cool things that we've seen in all these different places in our establishment here in New Haven.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so and like being able to just similarly work with some of what we consider the best, and even in Connecticut, there's like 60 breweries now, and we want to be able to work with a lot of these smaller guys. That's kind of how I look at it. There's like a farm to table movement, and I almost like to think of ourselves as like a beer to table, where we try to find as many localized brewers who we think are doing very quality liquid. We try to be able to feature a lot of them, and we try to make sure that we have good food that kind of matches with that as well.
So explain the difference, because I know this conversation is all over the place, but that's usually how we roll.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's how my brain is too.
I know. We can roll with that. That's fine.
Y'all are good with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So explain. I don't want to call them categories, but for instance, you talk about IPA, you talk about a lager, you talk about different. What makes them different? What's the difference between an IPA and a lager beer, or any of the other beers that you carry? Is it alcohol content? Is it hops?
Yeah, it's mostly ingredients. It's going to be, I mean, so the four main ingredients in beer are going to be the malts, the hops, the yeast, and the water. Right? Those are the four.
Those are the main things.
Yeah. And if you go to Germany, they have the Reinstebold, which is the German purity laws, which are, I'm not going to remember the year they were written. It was in I want to say the 1500s. But they basically say you can use those four ingredients and that's it. Now, obviously, that has changed dramatically. But, I mean, those are the four main things that are going to affect flavor, right? So you're going to get the color and the richness and like almost the texture of the beer from the grains. So if you use very low roasted malts, you're going to have lighter in color, pale ales, lagers, things like that. If you roast the malts longer, you're going to get darker, browner, amber,
roastier,
and then eventually you'll get chocolate and then black malts, and that's how you get. So it's like a roasting scale essentially of the malts is what's really going to give the majority of that light versus dark flavor. Okay. And then hops, yeast have huge. So are
IPAs light? Or can they be dark? Or is that just designation?
They can be either. It's just how they are fermented. Like certain beers are fermented at different temperatures. Generally, lagers are fermented for longer at colder temperatures. Whereas IPAs generally fermented for less time at a slightly higher temperatures.
So it's a little quicker.
Yeah, it's quicker and it's quite a bit quicker. But in terms of what will make an IPA versus, like, let's say a pale ale, generally it's going to be the addition of hops, how many hops are put in, the level of hops, the level of bitterness. There's a bitterness scale, IBU, International Bitterness Unit, that is going to, and that's going to feature a lot of what's going to be the difference between an IPA and a traditional pale ale, although the lines blur a lot. They really do for those specific styles. But so when someone says, especially when you look at some of the beers that people say they don't like, they're used to beers that were heavily bittered, beers that would have a 60 IBU or higher. And nowadays, there's certain beers that are still considered IPAs that have no IBUs, but they're still considered IPAs because all of the actual hop additions were done post, like in the whirlpool, like post actual boil. So the beer itself isn't going to be bitter, but it's going to be having some aromatics from the hops, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so there's going to be quite a bit that's going to change style. Whereas like with, let's say, a stout that a lot of the people who think of dark beer, those beers are going to have a lot darker malt. They're still going to have some addition of hops, some addition of all of the other things, but then there might be something else added. The amount of sugars you put in beer is going to affect.
So is that sort of, when you say that, is that sort of along the lines of a Guinness stout?
Somewhat, yes, but I think people's perception of Guinness and like dark beer stout kind of distorts a lot of the other darker beers because Guinness is actually pretty light for a dark beer.
Okay.
In terms of taste, in terms of its calories, in terms of everything about it, it's going to be on the lighter scale as opposed to certain beers like Imperial Stouts that are going to be oftentimes more bitter, oftentimes a lot roastier, a lot chocolatier.
A lot heavier.
A lot heavier, exactly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But people, they think of dark beers and they think of Guinness, and Guinness isn't really that heavy overall.
No, it's got a fairly light body. You know, something that kind of gives it that feeling of heft is the nitrogen pour. You know, Guinness is typically poured in an all nitrogen line, whereas most other beers are poured on a blend of nitrogen and CO2. So that will kind of give a beer more of a creamy, rich feeling when you pour it on nitrogen, which is, something Guinness does consistently. But yeah, Guinness, I mean, you drink it out of the can, out of the bottle into a glass, and it's got like almost a thinner kind of mouthfeel to it. It doesn't feel as like velvety and silky. It kind of just like feels thin and then dissipates.
And there's Heineken Dark also, right?
Yeah, Heineken Dark, I believe, is just a dark lager, a Cascadian lager, which typically means they'll take your standard lager recipe, which would be mostly blonde, mostly on the light side, and they'll throw in a little bit of darker specialty malts, like a chocolate malt or like a black patent malt, just to kind of give it a little bit of that roastiness, a little hint of bitterness, but really they want to get that color and that little bit of roastiness, and like hints of chocolate to it, which is one of those ways that you can use malts to really impact the flavor of beer.
Yeah, beer is a very complex world. It
sounds
trying
like
to make the formulas of what makes a beer this or that. It's very hard because they change all the time. Beer's just growing exponentially. Like when we first were writing our business plan 2.5, 3 years ago, there were under 40 breweries in Connecticut, and now there's maybe even under 30.
Yeah, it might have been under 30.
Might have been under 30. So we've basically doubled since we started planning this bar.
Oh, yeah, and there's still a bunch more to
stylistically, beers have changed. What people have liked have changed. And then people are like, I kind of like this mixed with a little bit of that. And then someone's like, I'm going to find a way to make it work. And we get really weird hybrids that, or someone's like, what?
So what's the strangest?
Depends on how strange you want to find beers. People are actually shoving the weirdest things in beers now. Like, there's actually a 12% Beer Project. They shoved a bunch of French fries and hamburger bun patties into the fermenter. And they made a beer. They made an IPA. What was its name? Hilma?
Hilma was that one. They also did they did that collaboration beer with the Veil called Fried Chicken, where they threw in a whole bunch of fried chicken.
Yeah.
And then there's something you like.
That is, that is the wildest thing I've ever heard.
There's a style that's actually become pretty well accepted and common, the oyster stout, where oftentimes
I've heard of that as well. Yeah.
So you can put a lot of weird combinations in, like, breweries all the time. There's this ongoing argument amongst beer nerds of what is a good beer and what isn't. And a lot of people don't like a lot of these additions because a lot of the best beers, they're like, what? I like how some of these chocolate malts give this flavor. Or if it's aged in a bourbon barrel, it might get a little bit of vanilla. So certain brewers will be like, what? Let's just throw a bunch of vanilla extract into this beer and see what comes of it. And there have been some very good beers made that way. But then, and people will love them. But then it seems like every brewer now is like, what? People like extreme taste. They want to be drinking a chocolate shake. They want to be drinking this. Let's shove a bunch of this. Oh, they like strawberry shakes. Let's shove a bunch of strawberries into this. And there's a lot of beer now that has very, very weird. Generally, 10 years ago, brewers would be pulling their hair out and like they'd be grounding their children for thinking these ideas, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about the Reinstückelt, the German purity laws, where they literally only used 4 ingredients.
Yeah.
Now people are like, I don't care.
I'll just put it in there. It doesn't matter.
Like.
Yeah, that's very different. That's very different.
And I'd say as a whole, there's like somewhat of a balance between, because I gotta admit, some of those beers taste very good. And I can understand why people would do them.
There's an appeal, for sure.
There's definitely an appeal. They're not necessarily everyday drinking beers.
Right.
There's something to just the classic old beer. And I think a lot of the dispute that's going on currently in the market is people who enjoy the classic taste of beer. And they're like, this is the beer that I enjoy. Why doesn't anyone make it anymore? Because a lot of other people are trying to capitalize on these new trends in beer. And beer's like any other industry where certain things go up, certain things go down.
Yeah.
IPAs are popular now. If you go back 10 years ago, Belgian styles are popular. Various other beers are much more popular, whereas now it's like lot of IPAs in 10 years. I don't even know. It could be. Could be lagers. I have guesses.
I think it will
but
be. I mean, we're
are you moving toward
shift towards back?
I was going to say, are they moving toward that now?
Moving towards more drinkability. So I remember. So growing up in Colorado, one of the interesting things is it's a very craft beer centric state. Like I remember when I'd be having college parties, we, instead of getting like a keg of Bud Light, we'd be getting kegs of Fat Tire or something that was already craft beer. So I basically lived my entire life drinking exclusively craft. And still at the same time, though, when I first got into beer, I was looking more at ABV, and I was like, oh, you know what I realized I like? I like beers that are like 9% ABV or more. I drink less of them. I get drunk easier, and then it's a little bit cheaper for me.
Right.
Plus, I just like these extreme flavors. And then I moved on to where I was like, okay, now I like a little bit more subtlety. And I think a lot of other people are similar, where like beers, double IPAs are still very popular, but the old double IPA back in the day was like 9-10% ABV. Now those beers are like 7.5%, 8% ABV, and it's oftentimes you find the same beer just at a lower ABV. So like now, what people are calling IPAs, they used to be calling pale ales, and what used to be pale ales are now session IPAs because just the term IPA sells.
Yeah, but it's flipped itself.
Yeah, you figure out how to put IPA into the name of any beer.
And it sells, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What does IPA stand for, by the way?
India Pale Ale.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it came about from a style because, I mean, the first times they ever put hops in a beer were when they were shipping beers overseas, and they were using hops as a preservative.
Okay.
So it was meant to preserve the beer, and then they started realizing, oh, these hops are imparting a lot of flavors onto the beer, and that we kind of like them, and then they started making them with hops.
Yeah.
But initially it was used as a preservative, and that's
where it came from.
Yeah.
So like they were trying to ship beer. I think it was from the UK to India, and
yeah, I think that was
India to
Europe for sure.
Yeah, maybe it was that way.
Yeah.
Hot or cold?
Beer?
There's some people who drink their beer warm and they swear that's the best way to drink it. And then there's other people who are like, I want a cold beer.
Depends on the beer. Yeah. Depends on the place. Depends on a lot. But for me, I'd say like stouts, bigger, heavier beers, you generally want to warm a little bit. Like you get a lot of flavors that you can't taste when they're cold, and you give the beer a little bit of time to breathe, a little bit of time to get to room temperature. Other beers, you're going to want to have cold lagers, easier drinking beers. Similar to wine, like white wine, you generally want to have chilled. Yeah. Reds, you generally keep at room temperature, and it's similar.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the coldness definitely numbs your tongue to certain flavors and things like that. So with like bigger beers like that, more beers where you're trying to pick up on subtleties like wild ales or like, you know, blended sours and lambics and things like that. You're going to want them a little bit warmer just to pick up on all the subtlety and all the little like flavors and hints that they're trying to come across. But yeah, again, with like lagers and stuff, you know, sometimes you just want a cold beer.
Yeah.
And I mean,
you know,
beer.
There's nothing
during a hot
better.
Summer day.
Yeah. I was going to say,
cold beer. Yeah.
You want a cold beer on a real hot summer day, or you've done something like my first experience with beer was my father had a Schaefer in the refrigerator and I washed his car, right?
Yeah.
I was hot as all get out. And I said, well, you know, people say a cold beer will kind of get rid of the thirst. Yeah, I didn't know anything about beer. It's like 18 years old.
Yeah.
At that time in Connecticut, I could legally drink at 18. Mm-hmm. So I drank this beer and I'm like, this is the best thing ever. Who thought of this?
I want to say the first beer I actually drank, I was not much of a fan of.
Yeah,
but,
really?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
I remember it was when I was younger, and that taste, for me, I remember tasting what now I'd probably enjoy, but I got like a lot of the grain and a lot of like, it tasted, what's the word, like almost weedy, and it was just, I didn't like the taste at all. And it was something that I'm like, oh, well, I guess I'm not going to like beer. And then like a couple years later, I'm like, I guess I was an idiot. And,
like, beer is awesome.
Beer is pretty cool.
You're listening to the show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, broadcasting live from downtown New Haven. We're streaming live on TuneIn Radio and newhavenindependent.org. We're also on live video on Facebook. All you have to do is go to facebook.com/New Haven Independent or go to your own Facebook page and look us up. And if you go to my page, Michelle Turner, it should be streaming, but that might be later on today. But Harry will have it posted on WNHH. So go check it out right now. Do it. But in the studio with me are the gentlemen who own the Beer Collective in downtown New Haven. What street?
Court.
Court. I always want to call it Wall. Court. Court Street.
Wall's
I
the
know
other
it.
way. We're like,
yeah, that's the other way.
Yeah.
So we can't talk about your place without talking about the food.
Oh yeah.
Because the food is fabulous. If you don't drink beer, which we want you to when you come there, right? But the food is just great. How do you come up with the menu? And does it pair with, do you, I would say, of course, you keep in mind what people are doing there, which is they want something to go with their beer, right? For the most part.
Yeah. So I think first we have to give shout outs to our chefs, Rob
Yes.
Latronica, who's our executive chef.
Woo!
Very young, very brilliant, and Trevor Rykowski, who's our sous. Both of them do a lot and do the vast majority of the menu design. They have the flavor palettes and ideas on how to make food. They know what they can and can't get in within the kitchen, and we just smile and we're like, okay, this sounds good. We like
this
to
sounds
eat.
delicious.
Has there ever been anything that you didn't like or said, well, this might
we'll
not
give
be
small
for us?
comments here and there, but for the most part, the vast majority of the menu is driven by them, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean they are. I mean they're both very talented and very passionate about food. So I think we got very lucky in kind of finding these two guys when we did find them, and they've done tremendous jobs with the menus. You guys can come in every day and eat, and then we also do these paired dinners with breweries that we call beer dinners, and we'll cover.
Oh, when are you doing that?
So we do them, once a month, every other month, sometimes depends on the
Am
time
I
of
on
year.
your mailing list? I
You're
want to
about to
say,
be.
You're
yeah,
about to be, I
I
guess.
should be, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd like to.
Oh yeah, the beer dinners are a lot of fun.
Yeah.
These guys put together incredible menus for them every time, and we'll work with the brewery. They'll bring in 6 beers, and we'll give the guys 5 beers to work with, and they'll pair 5 courses to these beers. And they have
Nice.
Yeah.
phenomenal jobs, and we've been able to bring in more breweries. They'll just love working with us on these kinds of projects, and just, for us, it's so exciting. seeing the
Can
menu.
I
We were
say-
talking a little bit about how they decided to brew the beer they did.
Yeah.
And then we talk about what it was in the beer that Rob will talk about what he found in the beer that he wanted to pair and accentuate, or how he thought this would go with the beer. And we actually do have another one coming up pretty soon.
Yeah.
June 3rd is going to be our next beer dinner. We're going to be doing
okay.
it with Lasting Brass Brewery out of Watertown, Connecticut, or Oakville, Connecticut.
Oakville, Waterbury.
And they're right over the border of Waterbury.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they make a lot of very good beers. Ed is similar to us, he's just started out around the same time as us and makes a lot of very high quality beer. And like us, just cares a lot about everything that he puts into it. He cares about it more than anyone else I know. And does great beers of all styles: IPAs, lagers, sours, saisons, and stouts even. I think his stout game is very underrated, considering he's known more for his IPAs or probably sours.
Yeah. So people are looking more toward that, right?
Yeah, so we're gonna have 6 of his beers on, and a variety of styles. You get varying sizes of each, along with a course that will pair with it, and I'm very excited for it.
Yeah, it should be a really good dinner. Ed is a fantastic brewer, like Torrin was saying. He's very passionate and very caring about everything he puts into his beer, which just comes through tremendously. And anytime you taste his stuff, and we're just excited that he wants to work with us, and he's hooking us up with some very interesting beers, which should make for a really fun dinner. So yeah, I think that one will be great. We have another dinner coming up after that too. So we're just trying to, work with some of the local guys that we're really a big fan of on those dinners, and schedule some stuff while the students are still in before summer, and have some stuff for them when they get back.
So, let me just say, if you don't serve anything else, keep serving that catfish.
It's staying
That
on the menu.
it's not
catfish
going anywhere.
is
That's staying on the
stellar.
It's so good.
It is
is
maybe my most.
stellar.
It's maybe the thing I get the most. I try to get it sometimes just the catfish without the chips, just because eating fish and
That many
chips every day,
fries all the time.
it's done enough to my stomach. And now I'm trying to make sure we're doing the New Haven Brew Race at the end of August. We have a team that we're sponsoring, and I've generally not been a fan of running my life, but I'm like, I've eaten too much catfish. So they're basically making me do it, and I'm like fine with it because I know that I could definitely use it.
You could
I
definitely,
could definitely use it.
It'll be good. A little training, a little running. Definitely never hurt anybody.
Yeah, never
hurt.
Never did anything bad.
But yeah, no, I mean, the catfish is phenomenal. My move is always, every once in a while, I'll get the catfish on top of a salad because I can't eat the fries. But
yeah, the fries are so good. It is such a pleasure to go in there and eat and have a good beer and, you know, just have that conversation. I've yet to sit outside on the porch.
Oh, you got
But I guess that's the goal.
Soon enough.
Very soon.
That's the goal, to get out there.
Some people did so. I think it was last Friday. There were a good amount of people.
Yeah, because it was pretty nice.
The weather was great, and today people tried.
Like, there's some brave souls that went out there.
It was windy. I was like, well, good luck. Like, we'll go out there and serve you, but like, I made sure to put the menus inside of our heavier menus because like, these are gonna blow away. Right. Today wasn't the best day for the porch, but soon enough. It's
soon.
I feel the day coming any day.
Yeah,
and
it's April 18th.
That's my birthday in like a week, and I'm hoping that it's going to be good so I can drink on the patio for my birthday.
Right, for your birthday. Absolutely. You having a party?
Kind of. So we're going to be tapping some special kegs for my birthday. I have a couple of
nice.
There have been a couple of very good kegs that we've been holding on to. So Founders has this beer that they've done twice now, and they did the second release a little bit ago. We've aged it for a bit. It's called Founders CBS Canadian Breakfast Stout. They call it Canadian because there's maple syrup in it. It's a barrel-aged stout, very heavy. It's going to be like you're having a nice maple chocolate syrup in your mouth, and it's absolutely incrable.
But
I love it.
Not without the sweetness, right?
There's gonna be some sweetness.
It's gonna have like a pancakey.
Like imagine you're having
like
pancakes.
A delicious chocolate breakfast. In your
it's going to taste, I think, more in line with the pancakes because you're gonna get more of the maple syrup than anything.
Yeah,
and you get some of the chocolate darker malts, which will give it a little bit of chocolate, but it's
for
a
the most
very
part.
delicious, well-rounded beer. So it's not going to be overly sweet, but it's definitely on the sweeter side. It's definitely something that people who tend to like a lot of extreme flavors are going to like. And we're going to have this other beer that I'm maybe even more excited about. It's from this brewery called BFM. They're out of Switzerland, and they have this beer called Abbey Saint Bonchien, which is a beer that generally they age in cherry barrels or
I think they blend a couple. I know they've used sherry barrels. They've used some ransom spirit barrels, but I think it's mostly like fortified wine barrels and things like that. Cause it's a strong sour barley.
So generally they do it in those barrels, but it's their 20th anniversary. So for this specific batch, they brewed it and put it into some Bordeaux barrels. So it has a lot of dark, deep, rich red wine characteristic. And did they throw in any fruit? I can't remember if they did.
Yeah. So this was the one where Jerome, who was the brewer and owner of BFM, he used the pomegranates and rhubarb from his backyard.
But that was the square root one, right?
It was both.
Both?
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's fabulous. So yes. I'm coming to the birthday party. I'm crashing. Bring the squad.
Gonna be those. We're gonna have some fresh
The squad's
hops.
gonna come in.
Squad's coming.
Squad's definitely
I'll
gonna
make sure
be
to
there.
reserve a table and make sure it's all ready to go.
Yes.
It's gonna be a birthday bash.
Absolutely, we will be there.
Yeah, and then we'll probably have a burger special as well. Our burger is very well received. I think it's the best. I think it's the best thing on the menu. I've had a lot of burgers, and of course I've had a lot of burgers. I see that look right. I didn't even eat burgers until I was like 22 anymore. But our burger specifically, I think we blend the meat in-house, and I think they do a very good job. It's well seasoned. Yeah, we have our own proprietary blend, and
wow, I didn't know that.
It's very, very good. It's going to be rich. It's basically impossible to not be juicy with how they make it. And
fantastic.
I'm sure there'll be some special associated with my birthday.
So you know what my request was, right?
Catfish?
No. Tea.
In
the wintertime. Because
that is something we've discussed, and it will come in at some point.
We talked about it.
I've heard it from a lot of people, but we're beer focused as of now.
Yes, I know.
There's always room to grow. There's always room in the future to potentially add.
Here's my 2 cents.
Okay.
We live in New England, right?
True.
So from January to say March, even though I think this month's an anomaly.
Yeah,
it's really cold, right?
Yeah. It was chilly.
So as you're sitting there waiting for your food, right, and you want to warm up, you have some tea, and then you have your beer, and then you have your food, and you have another beer.
It's a fair idea. I would also counterpoint with this, though. You could just have one of those big stouts, which will be naturally warming.
Yeah, those big boozy.
I knew that was going to come into it.
Although
I knew that was going to come into
practice
it.
responsible drinking habits at the Beer Collective. We want to make sure to mention that as well. But just saying, you could start with a small bit of a stout.
Small,
we give smaller
bourbon
pours.
selection,
True,
too.
we have
We
a
have
great bourbon
bourbon
selection.
Yes, talk about that a little bit
Bourbon
before we
warms you
go.
up. Bourbon
Yeah.
is very warming.
Yes, yes. So your bourbon collection.
So we wanted to have a lot of spirits that will kind of accentuate our menu. So we have beer. Most of our spirits are going to be spirits that were aged in barrels, similar to some of the beers that we like aged in barrels.
Yeah.
And especially like over time as we were building the bar and I was trying to find different tastes that I like, started really getting into bourbon. And we wanted a very, very strong bourbon selection. So we probably have, I'm guessing, 30-ish bourbons now.
Yeah, I would guess at least 30. And then, I mean, once you toss in some of the rye and stuff, we have also.
Yeah. We have
Turned into a
different
very
things.
nice
Barrel.
selection.
We have barrel proof, single barrel. We just have a lot of different bourbons. We also have a couple of tequilas. We have some gins. We try to have some spirits. We do have a vodka now, which wasn't always the case, but we try to offer vodka for people who just are tagging along, maybe not into beer. And then we do also have a reserve wine list and a wine list that we have recently added. So we've always had a lot of strong wines that we've had from one of our friends who's as into wine as we are into beer. And we recently added a lot of bottles that we're selling by the bottles to get very interesting wines you can't get really in many places.
In very many places.
Yeah, and like one of the things I think we focused on with the wines was the natural wine aspect, you know, the natural fermentation, the open fermentation, wild fermentation, which is something that we are both very, you know, into with beer. It was the wild stuff, the stuff that's, you know, fermented from the wild yeast in the air, and that's something we kind of talked about with our friend Adam Bicker, who put together the wine list. When we were doing that, was, you know, we knew a little bit about natural wine, I would say, at that point.
Small bit.
Adam is extremely knowledgeable, so, I mean, honestly, he turned us on to natural wine by letting us try some of these weirder, wilder, funkier wines that I honestly didn't even know wine could taste like. So, you know, once he kind of got us turned on to those a little bit, you know, it wasn't a hard sell to get us to put together a little menu for people.
Yeah, we grew with some wines. I'm trying, like right now, of bourbons that we have, if I had a recommendation, I'm a big fan of the E.H. Taylor stuff. We have their rye and their regular as well. Some of the bourbons that are more popular, the Hibiki, are doing really well. We have the Hibiki Harmony, and we have the Hibiki. It's a Harmony blend, and what is it? The Toki?
Toki.
Yeah. So, what is it as we wrap up? What is it that you want the public to know about the Beer Collective? If there's any message that you want to give them, what is it?
I mean, I would kind of touch on a little bit of, you know, how much we do like to work with the local guys. And, you know, especially if you're to the area and you want to find a cool bar where you could try anywhere from, I don't know, 6 to 10, maybe more local Connecticut breweries in one location, you know, come on down. We're always going to have some good IPAs that are local, you know, a few other like little things that are local and some hidden gems. And I mean, like you said, the food is phenomenal. So,
and yeah, like for me, I'd say I wanted to focus on, while our food is great, definitely the beer is what I'd say. Whether you were just getting into beer or you're very into beer, we have something for you. We are going to have different barrel-aged beers that you're not going to be able to find in many places, different breweries that you won't necessarily be able to find at as many places. As well, if you're coming in and you're not even sure how much you truly like beer, we'll guide you along that process. What we ultimately really love about the Beer Collective is we can find someone who is used to just drinking nothing but Budweiser, and we can train them and show them, oh, well, this is like Budweiser, but this is going to be a craft version of it. And then they might taste it and be like, wow, this is better than any beer I've ever had. What else do you have? And we want to be able to get those people from those beers to beers that they'll have a new favorite and then a rotating group of favorites. And we think that we offer a very good environment that we can uniquely provide for that. And we're just really happy to be a part of the New Haven community more than anything.
All of that sounds
Craig,
good.
Tarian, thank you so much for being here today. I'm glad you figured out how to get in the building.
Yeah.
Michelle, thank you. We found our way in. There was a couple doors. It was tricky.
And I'm hungry, so I'm coming over to Beer Collective like as soon as I hang this mic up.
Oh, we're doing the exact same.
I think we're going to do the same.
I thank you both for being here on the show today.
And thanks for the time.
Thanks again, Michelle.
Thank you. I learned a lot as well, so that was good. You're listening to the show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, broadcasting live from downtown New Haven. We're streaming too, TuneIn Radio and NewHavenIndependent.org. We're also streaming live right now on Facebook. All you have to do is go to facebook.com/NewHavenIndependent or just go to your Facebook page and look us up. Thanks, Harry. We're done.
Cool.
Cool.
You're going to have me on when my hair looks a lot better and shorter so I can actually use it and be like, hey, girl, you want to see me on TV?
Do you ever do any off-site recording?
Yes, I do.
Do you?
I do.
We should maybe talk for some of our bigger events. We'll get you to come down and do a little show.
Yeah.
That would be cool. We would
Right?
love that. Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Absolutely. Because, bottom line is I can always take my phone. I can do it on my phone, bring it back, or we can go live. I'm sure Harry can set that up.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we have some cool stuff in the books that we're planning for
keep
later
it
this
posted.
year. Especially, honestly,